We did the Hollyford Pike trip relatively recently, and we lugged surfboards down it. So you're kayaking on a boat, carrying a surfboard through the New Zealand native bush, and it's such a New Zealand experience.
Kia ora, and welcome to The Tramping Life, a podcast about hiking in Aotearoa New Zealand, or as we call it here, tramping. I'm John T, and in each episode I chat with people who share a passion for exploring this incredible country. We'll hear about the tracks they love, the huts they return to, the lessons they've learned, and what keeps them heading back into the bush. My guest today is Adam Currie from 350 Aotearoa. He's a leading voice in New Zealand's climate movement and a keen tramper. I'm delighted to welcome him to the podcast. Kia ora, Adam.
Kia ora, John T. Good to be with you.
Thank you. Now, where did things start for you? What were your first memories of being in the outdoors?
That period between primary school and high school, which I know is very stressful for a lot of people, was very stressful for me. I was worried about going to high school, with not having good friends and so on. And during that summer between primary school and high school, we were going to go on the Heafy track, which is like one of our first tramps I ever did. And I was really not looking forward to it, to be honest. I was like, I don't want to do this, blah, blah, blah. I never really had a good experience with tramping before. And then did it and loved it. And I've really loved it ever since. And over high school, I got quite involved in scouts. I did a lot of sailing. I was a scout leader for a long time. So I really got into it through scouts and just going on fun, silly trips with friends, people you love in the outdoors. And that's how I got into it.
Were there any trips that were particular learning experiences?
One trip that was a good learning experience was early on, scouts had these old sort of sailing boats, and so we decided it'd be really fun to sail up the Abel Tasman. And so we had some people walk the Abel Tasman, some people sail up the Abel Tasman. And that was quite an experience, just an old boat swimming to the shore, swimming out again, camping in Abel Tasman lakes as a high school kid, trying to organise all the logistics. That was a really good lesson in logistics. I still remember, and all the scouts I was looking after were like playing some game the night before, throwing those instant butterscotch sachets sort of up into the trees. And I remember lying down as we sat on the beach, waking up in the morning, and I saw this sort of German couple like stirring their porridge. And obviously one of the butterscotch puddings had still been stuck in the tree, and a little bit of wind blew. And then this butterscotch pudding fell out of the tree and straight into the German woman's porridge. And she's like, I like this country, with these butterscotch pudding falling from the sky. Anyway, I think that was one of my formative experiences, but then I guess going into university, doing more mountain trips, part of the Otago Tramping Club, and that's what really got my love into the mountains properly.
So I would say you're probably not a purist tramper, like you've already mentioned about using sailing boats, and then I can see from your packing you're doing skis and a packraft.
Yeah, I'm definitely not a purist tramper. I love going to really, really remote places. Often I'm like, if I can tramp to get to a really cool place, I'd rather do that bit. So I'll do the tramp as an approach to a big climbing wall. Then I'll go climbing in Fiordland, right? Or you'll do a tramp as to go mountaineering and to go climbing in the outdoors, or do a tramp to go swimming or kayaking, lug your boat up and kayak down from a really cool spot. So to me, it's, I could just go for the sake of tramping, but if I can go somewhere and do the other thing as well. The other thing's not the highlight. The whole thing's a highlight. The journey is as important as the destination. I like to tramp to go places and to do other things, which is usually the objective to me. Because then I do a lot of walking through the bush anyway to get to the mountains, but you get tramping and you get the other activity as well.
And what have been some of the most physically and logistically challenging trips you've done?
We attempted a big mountaineering trip over the Garden of Eden and Garden Ice Plateaus. That was a really cool trip, just a lot of various gear and skis and different people walking in to meet different people at different times. We didn't actually get over the plateau in the end because of weather, but we just had a really cool trip going through the mountains, and we ended up at the Rakaia. And if anyone knows the Rakaia, it's a pretty interesting access. You have to drive a long way up a very remote farm road. There's zero hitchhikeability, so we had to drive down there, and we just walk out for like this miserable day down the Rakaia, and then we just saw my friend driving my car up towards us in the farm and ending up what we thought might be another 2 days walk. So that was a pretty good feeling. And then I think just taking lots of students into the outdoors. So the Otago Tramping Club, I really enjoyed just teaching people and bringing people in the outdoors. The mountaineering side of things is even more inaccessible to people, both for gear, financial reasons, but also just confidence reasons. I think mentorship's the most important thing in tramping and in everything. Having that really good mentorship, I think, in the outdoors is so important that you can ask people, you can ask silly questions. And so I've really enjoyed doing that through the Otago Tramping Club and taking people into their doors and bringing people into nature that otherwise wouldn't.
How is the Tramping Club going
I think that young people today want to go tramping. They want to get out into the outdoors. You talk to the average person, we know we spend too much time on our phones. That's the thing about it. It's not like these problems that we all don't agree on. It's almost every young person wants to spend less time on their phone. They use time trackers and Instagram and so on. And when people have the opportunity to go into the outdoors, they thrive. Almost all the university tramping club trips are always overfulfilled. There's always massive wait lists, and it's because people value nature. People love going into nature. People love spending time with their friends. And so I think it's an incredibly popular activity, and it's all about making it more accessible to people and saying that you don't need the fanciest gear. You can walk in your old Topshop pants or whatever. You really don't need fancy gear, despite what Matt actually trying to tell you to get into the outdoors. Obviously, absolutely, safety is really important, but what's also really important is there's also a safety issue if you sit at home and you watch TV and you don't get into the outdoors and you don't get fit and you have health issues from that, right? Absolutely, we need to be giving people the resources and the knowledge they need to get into the outdoors.
Have you had any near disasters whilst out on your trips?
I had one pack rafting. So pack rafting, for people who don't know it, is when you have an inflatable kayak, basically. So they range from the warehouse. You can get those pump-up inflatable rafts, which is the student method, which is quite cheap, but obviously don't do quite so well on the rivers, to very fancy, proper pack rafts, which I guess are much more designed to be done on white water and much lighter and so on. But yeah, we've had a few trips with various old boats, and one of them, my ex-partner and I were kayaking down. We did the Gillespie Pass circuit, which is a really lovely pack rafting circuit, actually, because you can walk over Gillespie Pass and you can pack raft all the way out to Wilkin. And we got a big tree, popped the pack raft, and the pack raft went, and then you have what was about going to be a 3-hour kayak became a 5-hour walk through the thick bush.
In terms of pack rafting, is it reasonably well established now in terms of some of the routes, or is it you look at the topo map and go, there's a river there, so I presumably I can get down?
Yeah, there's actually a fantastic resource called packraftingtrips.nz, and that's run by one guy mainly, but it's supported by the Pack Rafting Association New Zealand. And that's just an incredible resource. We're the only country in the world that has it like it. The home of pack rafting is really Alaska. Even Alaska doesn't have a resource like it. It's basically the beloved New Zealand topo map, which we're so lucky to have, with literally like people have put a line down the river. This is a grade 1, an easy river. This is a grade 4, a very hard river, and so on, and all the notes of how to do the trips. It's very accessible and easy in that sense, of course, except for the part of finding the pack raft. And while you can use warehouse rafts, there's only so much you can do with warehouse rafts, and it's very expensive otherwise. But yeah, I find there's a really good thing. And although a lot of people use the resource and don't contribute anything for it, so people can contribute $3 or something if they use it, it's always much appreciated. But the Pack Rafting Association New Zealand is a really big part of the culture now, and is a really active club where they have big annual meet every year where everyone comes together and does big pack raft trips around Murchison. But also, you can just also get an old plastic kayak and lug it. Like, you're not going to get quite so far. It's obviously not quite so light, but it's still great fun with the boat on your back. In the same way we did the Hollyford Pike trip relatively recently, and we lugged surfboards down it. So you're kayaking on a boat, carrying a surfboard through the New Zealand native bush, and it's such a New Zealand experience. A lot of people go to Europe and go to Chamonix or whatever to go climbing, and maybe you're climbing hard all day and back having a fancy restaurant for dinner, but the wilderness experiences, that sense of adventure is something that New Zealand's so lucky to have. We have a third of our country's national park. We're really lucky to be able to have that experience where we can really go into the wilderness and be the only person for many kilometres.
I'm thinking about our hut network. Have you got any particular favourites?
Oh, yeah, a lot of favourites. I love the mountain hut. So French Ridge Hut is a really lovely hut. I also love, for anyone in Dunedin, I would really recommend Staircase Hut. It's one of the cutest, quaintest. It's literally 20 minutes from Dunedin, maybe, and it's pretty close. And it's just, you walk up a beautiful river, and it's this quaint hut with a fire and a bed right in front of the fireplace. I also love the Silver Peak Circuit. It's something really special, which is really close to Dunedin again, like 20-minute drive. You can even run it from Dunedin, but it's just a hut that's so accessible to people. It's amazing for getting people tramping. It's a relatively safe circuit. There's 3 huts along the way. That's a really beloved place that I think is so special for in bringing people into the outdoors.
And then moving on to your work you've been doing with 350 Aotearoa, could you explain what that involves?
I came into, I guess, activism and climate politics and stuff when I was in high school, while I was still in Scouts and so on. But we had a big flood in Nelson And our house wasn't as bad as others, but we were sandbagging and everything. And my neighbour, his whole living room was destroyed, and we had to carry him out with this complete loss of dignity. And then we went to, after the floods, which were of course climate fueled, and I think the scientists can work out now it's 40% fueled by climate or 70% or whatever. We went to talk to the local MP at the time, who was actually Minister for the Environment, Nick Smith. But I felt more hopeless talking to him than I did when we were literally sandbagging our house. And so I think that's what I really thought. A lot of people don't have the privilege and the opportunity to be really vocal for the climate. And my friends from Guam and from the Pacific and so on, of course, many communities in Northland and so on in New Zealand, I think, so impacted by climate, and it's a really important thing to do. So from then I got involved in Generation Zero, which was a youth advocacy group where we wrote the Zero Carbon Act and then campaigned to get it into law successfully, although there's a lot of debate now over whether it was actually a mistake at the time. Russell Norman, the current CEO of Greenpeace and former co-leader, argues that actually the Zero Carbon Act was a net negative because there was so much political attention in 2019. There was the school strikes, there was a new Labour government under Jacinda, and the Zero Carbon Act there can say, this is the big climate thing we're doing, where of course it's a framework. The Zero Carbon Act's not action of itself. It's a framework and a commission to establish action, but it's never action itself. And so a lot of people have argued it was a net negative. But for good or for bad, we did that. We ran our campaign, and I then went for DOC first, with the Department of Conservation, and then worked for Greenpeace, and now I work for 350 Aotearoa, which is a real sort of grassroots, and I mainly run trainings. The basic point is we have a couple of paid staff to enable a lot of people to campaign, right? I've got 40 hours a week or whatever, and maybe another 20 hours of my volunteer time when you're mobilising volunteers and training people to do the campaign they do. Not only do they have the skills you don't have, you can have 600, 700 volunteer hours of work instead of 40. So it's a far more effective model of campaigning, in my view. It's all part of an ecosystem. We all complement each other. That's why I love doing the work I do.
And what are you seeing in terms of the level of interest of volunteers? Is it increasing in numbers? Is it primarily younger? Is it older? What's the kind of demographics and trends?
So it's a really interesting demographic. I think our email list, which is, I guess, one of our primary forms of communication, is definitely older, leaning older, but a lot of volunteers are younger. And I think that now there used to be maybe 5-10 years ago, there were the climate people, which are the sciencey people that campaigned on climate change and so on. And since the floods and the storms and as the climate crisis escalates, it's been opened up. And the climate people, or we call them the climate people, have to everyone. Everyone's impacted by this, and everyone is impacted by this issue. And people are linking it to the cost of living, which of course it's so closely correlated with. And so I think we're seeing a massive amount of volunteers. I think people are very concerned about climate change, young people and older people. Often older people feel they want to do their bit to not leave the world in the worst place for their children, and young people realise the importance of climate. So it's really collaboratively, I think, with old people being a bit of a tuakana taina relationship where older people do some mentoring. But I also think there's a lot of anxiety and a lot of doomism, like it's too late, it's too bad, and we can't do anything about it. But it's the nature of climate change, right? It can always be slightly worse and slightly better. You can always have 1 degree of warming, 1 degree less of warming. It's never we've had climate change or we've stopped climate change. Every fraction of a degree of warming averted save lives. And I also love it because I think the volunteers, like, you run a campaign, sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. Either way, you win by moving the dial. But also you win by people feeling that they're involved in politics, they're involved in campaigning. People have come together, they feel like they have a voice, they have community, they build their friends, people meeting their partners there, their best friends there, and taking action in community instead of sitting at home feeling sad and watching Instagram videos about the state of the world.
So what kind of campaigns do they run?
At 350, we run our campaigns based on what the other climate organisations are doing, and also just we are volunteers and what we think is the most strategic. And so we have a long history of divestment campaigning, so campaigning for banks to divest from fossil fuel companies, because if the fossil fuel companies can't get the finance to do what the things they want to do. And that's what people also miss there, is it's also a gradient, right? Yeah, maybe if Westpac drops a particular fossil fuel company, yeah, they'll probably be able to find finance elsewhere, but they're forced towards the loan shark end of the spectrum, and then having higher interest rates and everything that goes along with that, and it just becomes harder and harder. And so I think a lot of it with fossil fuel companies is It's death by 1,000 cuts. It's getting those lobbyists, kicking polluters out of negotiations and out of government. It's costing them extra money through divestment. It's through all the different things. So we have a big banks campaign, which has been very successful, getting banks to divest from the worst fossil fuel companies. And Kiwi Bank is now fully fossil free. Some other banks, too, Westpac and BNZ, are both dropping coal companies. At the moment, we've got a big campaign to protect the Denniston Plateau from coal mining. And that's in particular because last year we had a campaign against the fast track law, which is a law that would enable, amongst other things, really destructive projects against democratic and environmental input. And this law has effectively enabled a really large coal mine, which is far bigger than any other mine in New Zealand's history. And that's on the Denniston Plateau, which is a very unique, special place with native forests and so on. And it would be replaced by a giant coal mine the size of Nelson City. And we had a debate recently against the coal lobbyist, and we're like, oh, it's a blight in the landscape the size of Nelson City. And he said, Nelson's a blight in the landscape too, isn't it? So he's very witty. But yeah, I think it's really important to have these really big, iconic campaigns that we can all rally around. And of course, it's important because this particular mine is so big, the emissions from this mine alone are equivalent to New Zealand's entire annual climate emissions. So the size is just astronomical. But also, it's just a really important rallying point. And we've already been very successful. We've forced them to delay their application. We've had massive scrutiny. We've got concessions to the Fast Track Act because I think that these fossil fuel companies, they also don't. What I think a lot of New Zealanders don't realise is, number one, the size of it. We always think of this old coal miner with his axe working hard, and I totally support the awesome people that did coal mining with axes back in the day, but that's not what it's like now. As I said, it's the size of Nelson City, these ginormous, devastating impacts. And I think New Zealanders don't support cutting down native forests to make way for coal mines. And also, it doesn't provide us with royalties, so we know that it costs the government more to fix up a single mine than it does for all royalties for the entire year. And of course, they're all offshore owned. And so it's not providing our economy with benefit. And it's definitely not providing us with good, stable jobs that we can rely on for decades to come. And we also, of course, do local election campaigns, which we ran a big one, which just obviously finished over the weekend, trying to get climate justice and Maori wards into local politics. We run vision campaigns of what we do want, just transition campaigns to promise good, clean jobs to everyone that wants them, all sorts of things. There's a lot of volunteers and a lot of work going on. A great example of a really cool connection between tramping and campaigning is on the Denniston Plateau, whereas over Easter we had about 70 or 80 of us tramp up to the Denniston Plateau, a place that's a threat from coal mining, and occupy the area, tramped up there, and we took the civil resistance of stopping anything from happening up there. It was in this area where a similar mine had happened about 10 years earlier, the Save Happy Valley campaign, where there's a long history of tramping and defending places through tramping and being interactive with the outdoors. But I also think it's important to remember that with climate change, it's often seen as this environmental issue. And sure, climate change affects the environment, but it affects people's lives just as much, and it affects the city just as much. So it is an environmental issue, but it's also not an environmental issue. What I think one of the interesting things of this whole debate is we talk about Nature, almost a decade ago now, produced an article proving that X tons of emissions equals 1 lives lost. And this particular coal mine, according to Nature, the most academic journal in the world, one of the most prestigious journals in the world, calculations are that this particular coal mine proposal at Denniston Plateau would cause, I think it's over 30,000 deaths. The single coal mine would cause 30,000 deaths. But if I try to say something like, if an MP tried to say that in Parliament, if I try to say that in the media, you'd be torn to shreds. It's just not a serious concept. But it's true. It's 100% true. But it's just funny that our political realities and the way we talk about things are so constrained that if I talk about someone that is from a health and safety issue directly dies on a site, then absolutely you can talk about it, rightly so. Air pollution, is in that middle ground, right? We know that 1 in 10 deaths in New Zealand is from air pollution, from things like coal mines and fossil fuels and cars. And that you can't really talk about that, but you most definitely can't talk about how the climate impact of coal mines in New Zealand is killing tens of thousands of people. It isn't accounted for, which is a shame because it should be, but it's just it's a sad reality that we need to continue changing through storytelling.
What's your levels of optimism?
I'm always relentlessly optimistic. I always think we're in an emergency, right? But the word emergency itself means it's not over. If it was over, it'd be past the emergency and it'd be too late. But it's not. We're in the emergency and we can emerge from the emergency. I'm relentlessly optimistic. And I think people know that a clean energy is ours for the taking. Anyone that says otherwise is paid for by the fossil fuel industry and the politicians that they pay for that are trying to convince us otherwise. I think New Zealanders know, and people want clean air is popular, healthy water is popular, and stable jobs that we can rely on for decades to come are popular. So I really do think that just by appealing to people's intrinsic values, by bringing the conversation back to humanity, to who we are, and being in right relationship with each other and with the place, we bring us together. I am optimistic that we can come together, we can discover some humanity in this, and we can live much better lives. I love that graph, which is so old now, but it's climate action, and it's got all the benefits of green jobs, clean air, healthier water. And then one guy goes, what if it's all a sham and we create a better world just for nothing?
So back into the tramping world, what's on your bucket list of trips to do?
I'd really love to go back into the Garden of Eden, as I referenced earlier, which is a really beautiful ice plateau, which sort of goes all the way from the west coast, one of the only east-west long glaciers, and that's a really special trip that I'd really love to do, and I'm hoping to do this December. A lot of bush bashing through really thick west coast bush, which I love. It's one of the things you hate at the time, and you get out of it, you're like, oh, that was fun. But there's all these videos of me going, I hate nature, for my friend's sake. So I'd really like to go there. I'd love to go up to the Olivines Ice Plateau, which is a bit of a classic Otago tramping climb activity, which I've never been all the way up to the Olivine Wilderness. So these really remote, special places. But also, as I go on, being a bit more of a mentor and bringing more people into outdoor spaces. And I've done that walk up the Matuki for those who know Aspiring National Park very well. I've done that walk up the Matuki endless times more to take people at such a fantastic training ground. Another place a lot of people don't go that I would really recommend is Canyon Creek, the Aotearoa. The Aotearoa is a really beautiful river that no one really goes to. There's a really lovely hut that you can actually drive to and you can crash at after driving them Friday night after work, and then you can walk up to this beautiful place called Canyon Creek with this amazing ice climbing and everything else. It's also just a beautiful place to hang out, and it's a really great training ground for young people. So I'm really excited to bring more people into the outdoors and get people falling in love with these wild places, because and also doing it together in community. Like I definitely had this almost obsession with nature for a long time, and what I mean by that is like I would just be outside tramping as much as I possibly could. And now if I have an option for going for a week-long tramp by myself or a 3 or 4 day tramp with friends I love, I usually go with a 3 or 4 tramp with the friends I love. I think the important thing for me about tramping is it's the people you're going with as well. And there's absolutely something to be said for solitude, and I think we don't have enough solitude in our lives, and I think that's something really important. But I've had that part of my life, but at this part of my life, I just think that just like spending time with the people we love and developing relationships with new people, and so many of my closest friends I've met in random tramping huts, and you've been snowed in or rained in, and you've been forced to hang out for a day or two in some remote mountain or just West Coast hut, building relationships through that, and just building better relationships with each other. But I think we're coming into this age where people are realizing how important our relationships with each other are, and this building community and living together, I think, is a really important part of that. It combines nature and it combines people. I think those two relationships together are what really makes it so important to me.
Thank you so much for listening to The Tramping Life. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please follow the podcast in whatever app you use. Tell a friend about it and consider leaving a rating or a review. It really helps more people discover the show. If you have any questions or feedback, I'd love to hear from you. Drop me an email at thetrampinglife, one word, @gmail.com.